There are a couple that comes from other parts of the country. Southern Belle from Mississippi, and her spouse from Louisiana. I give you Doc and Suzie O'Kane.
Okay. We've decided that we're all going to stand for the rest of the presentations. So now we're going to talk about considerations when breeding your mare. So first of all, I got to tell y'all, of all the experience we've had in breeding shed business, I could never begin to tell you how crazy that place is. And the breeding shed crew is like a group of people on your farm that are completely different from anybody else. And as serious and as dangerous as it is, these young stallions that retire some of them are hilarious. How they take to breeding. You'd think that it would all be real natural, and some of them, we had a stallion that retired, and he'd get all aroused, and then he'd just put his chin on the mare's rump and stand there. And the mare would turn around and look at him like, what is your problem? and some of them are really hard to handle right off the get-go, very enthusiastic. I had a stallion one time, the first mare he ever bred. He jumped up and bred her side and thought he did a great job. And then he fell down right in front of the mare. And she actually looked at him like, I hate you, you know, I mean, who is this creep here? So, and along the way, which I'm not going to talk about a lot, but one of the major parts of a breeding farm and the whole process is the introduction to breeding that the stallions get. And it's so critical because breeding is such a strange thing that you don't want them to have a bad habit and like savage the mare or, you know, try to abuse her. You don't want them to be too aggressive, and yet you don't want to intimidate him by scolding him a lot. It's a huge task to take young colts and train them to breed and the behavior in the breeding shed, because the last thing you want to do is have your mare sent somewhere and have a problem. So anyway, let's talk about considering when breeding your mare. The first thing that applies to everybody, no matter what quality you mare or what quality stallion you want to go to, you have to pay a lot of attention, because you don't want to dig a hole and lose money year after year after year. I mean, after a while, you got to throw away the shovel. And Joanne, if I may use you as an example, I've been at Keeneland with Joanne. Joanne was a breeder of the year last year, and I can tell you why she is. Because she puts so much effort into selecting her matings. She personally goes to the stallion farms in Kentucky and physically examines the stallions. You know, it's one thing to look at them in a directory or see, you know, the typical profile. Well, there's a lot you don't see with the profile. And if you can, before you choose a stallion, go and see him and check him out. Because besides his conformation, you also want to see what kind of temperament he has. I had a stallion one time that was so bad that every baby he had was bad, and they were incredibly talented, early 2-year-olds. But nobody wanted to train them. Nobody wanted to break them. Nobody wanted to handle them. So nobody bred to them anymore. So you want to make sure one thing, important factor is the stallion's temperament, because you want a foal that you can handle at your farm and that training centers are going to be able to enjoy the whole process, and when he's a willing participant when he gets to the racetrack. So when you think about breeding your mare, what you have to consider is does she have the value to be reproducing? And if she doesn't, then you will not be able to sell the baby, and you will not be able to probably the chances are against you that you won't be able to race and won't be a successful racehorse. So you have to be very objective about every mare you have. And if you feel that she hasn't produced, if she has a conformation defect, you really probably should pass on her and look for another mare. People's broodmare bands age all the time anyway, so you're always turning them over. So whether you're going to sell the baby or you're going to race the baby, you have to consider those qualities about that mare. Because even though we have a lot of purse money we're handing out and a lot of awards money, you got to have the right product or you won't earn any of it. So that's key. And the worst thing you can do is have a mare and breed her for sentimental reasons. And I guess everybody's done that, but it's just a tough thing because sometimes you keep them, they're not producing, and you're just wasting money. So there's always plenty more mares out there to buy. You're never at a shortage to buy one. So anyway, the next thing in choosing your stallion is number one, for people who haven't bred before, I think a lot of them are very timid and they're afraid to admit, you know, gee, I don't know that and I don't know that. But I have found that most of the breeding farms have staff on hand that are well versed in what you need, the questions you have, and they're prepared to answer and educate you as much as they can. So if ever you need anything, the farms are there for you, and they want you to have a good experience because they want you to come back again and again and again. So don't ever feel that you're any kind of intimidation, because it's too expensive a proposition not to make sure you do everything the right way. The second thing you do when you choose a stallion is, as our friend here just said, the NYBreds program is wonderful. We all have access to that at home. We can, at night when we have nothing else to do, we can sit and do 10,000 NYBreds and hope we find the right one. But it's fun. And you know, it really is exciting because when you feel like you've really found that right NYBreds, then you can't wait for that baby to be born. I mean, it's so exciting. And when it's born, you realize if it's correct and all the things are in the right place, that you've got options. If you want to race it, fine. Maybe it'll be a pretty good racehorse. If you want to sell it, you'll have a market for your horse. You always want to stay out of the hole and figure out your budget, whatever it is. You can group the stallions in your price range, and that's who you should be picking. Because you can't, there's no guarantee that that baby is going to come out perfect and you would be able to sell it. And the other thing I've already touched on is you need to go and view the stallions. The conformation shot profile is really tough because you're just seeing a side angle. You're not seeing the knees, if they're offset, toe in, toe out, whatever. You need to see that if possible. Check out the stallion. And again, check that temperament, because otherwise you're going to be saying, I dread bringing him in and turning him out every day, because it's dangerous too. And when you look at the stallion, you need to, first of all, there's a lot of people who go to a stallion show and they go to a farm and they go, oh, gee, I'm really anxious to see so-and-so, and they get there and they see somebody they'd never dreamed of breeding to, and they go, I really like that horse. There's a certain chemistry that we feel with certain horses. Stallion comes out and you look at it and, you know, he's like talking to you a little bit, and you get this feeling like, gee, I thought I liked the other one, but I like this one so much better. So try to have an open mind, because you never know. So your first impression, and then, of course, his conformation. You know, why start out in, I know some horses have been great race horses, and they've overcome all kinds of conformation defects, but that doesn't always happen. And if you can at least prevent that with your mare and the stallion you pick, that's a high priority, because Again, you don't want to lose money. No one has ever lost money in this business, and we don't want to start doing that now, right? So anyway, and then the confirmation and the pedigree. And so then all this information we just got from this gentleman, just think how helpful that is. What if we had to research all that ourselves? All this has been done. Well, you know, I think we pay more attention to equine reproduction than we do with our families. and I mean, can you imagine if you only married somebody if it was a good Nick, and you'd have great kids, right? I mean, that would be bizarre. So with animals, you have that option, and you can do it. So take advantage of all of it. There's a bunch of things, a bunch of tools, and it all goes on history. What has worked before? So you don't have to go through that process. Race record, that's important too. I like, when I have a stallion or thinking about a stallion, I like a stallion who had a decent race record. I don't like to see like 2 starts as a 2-year-old and then he's done. I've had stood horses that did that. I had one that had 1 start, and he used to get quite a few mares, and then in time he didn't anymore. But that usually means they're not sound. And so if it happens to the sire, it could very well happen to your horse. So now I know Danzig is, you know, he's contrary to that, but don't look for any problems. If trouble will find you, don't look for it. Go for the best that you can afford, and go for the best that you have personally inspected and have this feeling about. And when he retires, you want to know why he retired. Why did he retire? Did he have his career and everything was going well, and all of a sudden, you know, he just had, say a horse has 25 starts and he retires? That's totally acceptable. Even 10 starts, that's a lot. The average for a lot of sires is 7, their progeny, 7 starts. So you're not looking for this horse that has 1 million starts, but just something reasonable. All right, so after you've done your homework, you've decided whether you like your mare or not, or you have to trade her in, and you've searched all the stallions. Now you're to the point where you're ready to book. So the paperwork is so important, because all that information gets fed into these farms' databases, and that goes on reports like Report of Mares Bred, this, that. So all this is becomes part of her produce record forever. And so again, if you're selling, people have access to see all that on your mare. What has she done? So when you decide to breed, you call the farm, and you have to get a contract. And I guarantee you, I bet most people really don't study these contracts, but you should, because there's a little different tweak in each one. I know we always had one in ours that said all the farm bills, the board bills, the blacksmith and the vet had to be paid before you issued a stallion service certificate. So you need to just study it. Most of them are very appropriate. They've been studied by many lawyers, and I mean, there's so much liability with taking care of your horses at a breeding farm and breeding them in the breeding shed. You must make sure yours is protected as well as the farm. So just give it a little bit of a look. When you send in the contract, they're going to want you to send the mare information sheet, and it has her produce history and blah, 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 and they need to have her history and whatever has happened medically. You can imagine how important that is. You ship a mare into a farm. The farm, they don't know if your horse has colicked and had colic surgery at some point in her life. They need to know that, because they're going to, you know, probably do things a little differently to keep her healthy. So the information sheets and vaccination records, same thing. Send as much as you can. I'd rather have too much than not enough. And the one thing too, all this information goes into a different file on the computer. So when a horse goes in the breeding shed, you know that's who's supposed to be in the breeding shed, and you know that's a stallion she's supposed to be bred to. If you don't keep good records, there are mistakes and accidents that happen. Not a lot, but it can. So I think that's all I have to say, except I have a funny story to tell you. You know, we are so different, aren't we? We're the greatest group of people in the world, and I wouldn't want to do anything but this, ever. And I guess I'm never going to quit doing it. I don't know what's wrong with me, but it's like last night we all had this good time, and we were hugging and so happy to see each other. We come here and we hug. Oh, hi! It's like we haven't seen each other. What a great group of people. But we are such a funny world because the outside world can't get what we do. They don't. Our families still don't understand why April 10th we couldn't go to a 50th anniversary party. My sister says, it's the same excuse, we're here. I said, excuse? We can't leave in the middle of breeding season with, you know, a couple hundred mares. So nobody gets it. So one time I was, and really the fans, when the horse steps foot on the racetrack, most fans that are just fans, not students of the game, they think that's the first day of that horse's life. It never enters their mind. I wonder where they grew up, and when they retire, gee, I wonder where they go. Nobody ever, so we are very unique. So I was going to Florida one time, I was on the plane. I was talking to this guy next to me, a very nice man, a real gentleman. So we were talking, he goes, what do you do? Well, you know, I hate to tell people, stallion promotion and development. It's like I wait for this leer, you know, like, what the heck's your problem? And so anyway, I told him, and, you know, he accepted that pretty well, and I explained a little bit. And so he said, do you and your husband go to Florida every winter? And I looked at him and I go, no. I said, we can't go to Florida all winter. I said, that's our breeding season, thinking that the whole world understands what I'm doing, right? And the man, I could tell he was so uncomfortable because he wanted to ask me, but he's thinking, do I dare? Am I going to insult her? So he's like shaking his head and stuttering, but he had to ask me. He goes, you and your husband have a breeding season? I go, where did you get that? So anyway, we're in it's such a great business, and we're so thankful that y'all support us, and I think these seminars are great. If nothing else, we all get to know each other a little bit better. So thank you for coming, and thank you for your time.
How many of y'all have never been to a breeding shed or seen a breeding? Okay, so I can talk to a few. Most of you here have been, and so this is kind of just elementary to most of you, and I'll just go through some of the things that the farms can do to help the breeding farms when the mare gets there, and preparation of the mare and so forth. Scott's going to cover generally most preparing the brood mare and so forth for the breeding shed, but these are just some things that maybe you'll just reminders of things that you should do. At the farm, there are some things that you can do to prepare your mare to go to a breeding shed. One thing is you don't want to send a mare to the breeding shed with hind shoes on and have her kick the stallion. And I've had this happen before, especially with maiden mares coming off of the track. People will send you a maiden mare with racing plates on, with toe grabs on them, and expect you to breed the mare to your stallion. So that's something that you probably should do, as well as Scott will tell you, when mares come off the track, we don't really want to get behind them and do a rectal exam on them with racing plates on either, so it protects us also. Another thing that's really important at farms, if possible, I know it's not always possible to tease your mare. Some farms only have 1 or 2 mares, so they can't have a teaser. But if you have a commercial farm and you have a number of mares there, it's very important to tease the mare. It gives you a record of her schedule of cycling. It tells you what kind of temperament she has, and you can relay all of this to the breeding shed when you take the mare down there. Another thing that teasing does, and it's rarely brought up, and maybe Scott can confer this, mares that have probably older mares that have problem mares, we use like oxytocin to expel fluid and so forth from the uterus and help them get in foal. The natural teasing part of mares, and most people don't know this, but when a mare hears a stallion coming down the shed row and is teasing them, they actually have minor uterine contractions from that stimulation, and it helps expel fluid or excess fluid and debris from the uterus. So that's another reason to tease the mares. I'm going to just mention castlicks here, and Scott, I'm sure, is going to, both of us talked about earlier, we could talk an hour on what to do with castlicks, the best way, the wrong way. They are done a lot of wrong ways sometimes. But if at the farm, if you're getting ready to send your mare out and you have a veterinarian there, or if you're capable, and her castlick needs to be opened, you could open it at the farm prior to shipping her, and when she gets back, resuture her. If you don't have that capability, the farms normally, most of them have that capability of opening the castlicks. A lot of times, if you have a castlicks in the mare, they don't have to be opened. The stallion can actually breed under them, so it will save you some time and money if you don't have to open them. Another little, I'm gonna just mention shipping. If you have a barren or open mare, shipping is not a problem. I'm a firm believer on breeding on foal heat, so normally you have a foal at the farm that's by the mare's side or in subsequent breedings. And a lot of people like to send them with the foal with the mare to the breeding shed. I don't. I like to leave the foal at home for several reasons. You always have a chance of the foal getting hurt in a van. Plus, when the mare gets to the breeding shed and that foal's outside raising hell in the trailer, it's really tougher on the breeding shed crew breeding the mare. And so it's just something I prefer. Some people always send the mares, and that's what they like to do. So anyway, Suzie has a little story here about, well, I'll just stop for a second, let her tell you a little story about breeding mares. Go ahead.
I could really sit here all day and shock all of you to death with some of the stuff that goes on. Anyway, we had a sheriff's sale at the farm one day, and he brought his little girl. And so the mother and the little girl, I took them to the foaling barn, and we had expanded metal doors, which are all open. So this little girl walked down and saw, it was a foaling barn, all these mares and babies. And she goes, that's a mare and baby? Yeah, that's a mare. So we got to one whose mother was off being bred. And, with little kids, when they ask you a question about reproduction and stuff, you just tell them just the minimum and just let their head, deal with that. So we got to one whose mother was off being bred, and she said, "Where's that baby's mommy?" And I thought, well, how do I answer this? So I just said, she went off to be bred. Oh, okay. So after the sheriff's sale, she wanted to show her dad, the lawyer, the mares and babies. So she went through, it was amazing what she picked up, and she explained all this. And when they got to the stall without the mother, she says to her dad, Daddy, she said, "This baby's mommy went off to get some bread."
Yeah, you know what, at these farms, everybody should keep a diary of all their experiences, and I wish I would have, but I didn't. But anyway, moving on, Prior to shipping your mare to be bred, another thing you can do, and I prefer doing this prior to shipping the mares, is use an ovulation-inducing agent, which most of y'all are familiar with, which is HCG is one, Deslorilin is another one, and there's some other brand names out there. But what this does, it's used to optimize your time of ovulation with your breeding. The reason I like to give it prior to breeding and not wait until they're bred or after they're bred is that any drug that you give, no matter what it is, it takes time to work. It's not going to work immediately. So let's say I have a mare that I'm breeding at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and I know she's not going to ovulate immediately. You can give the HCG or Deslorilin in the morning, and it's just going to be working all day, and actually that mare will ovulate a little sooner or closer to your breeding is what you're wanting anyway. So it's just something that I do. I don't know how Scott's feeling on that is, whatever. And here, what y'all can kind of expect when you arrive at the breeding shed or at the breeding farm. Paperwork's always important. All farms require a negative Coggins test. All farms, or I should say, they should require a negative uterine culture, and we required it on every cycle. If your mare has a uterine infection, she's not going to get in foal, so it's something that should be done every cycle if she doesn't get in foal. I'll touch base. Some farms, I like to breed on foal heat if I can. Some farms I know do not require a negative culture on foal heat, and I don't know why. So I'll just because I have my opinions on that. But mares do get infections on foal heat, and so I don't know why you would want to send a mare to the breeding shed with a dirty culture, and she's not going to get in foal. So I culture everything on foal heat. And it's just something I've routinely done, and there are a significant number of mares that come up dirty on foal heat. Scott may touch on something that will help with that. I started years ago, mares that you know you want to breed on foal heat, you can give them oxytocin, which we've talked about earlier, and I give them a cc of oxytocin twice a day for 7 days prior to breeding on foal heat, and it's cut down on uterine infections and conception rate considerably, or help with conception rate considerably. So that's something else, if you want to write down, you can do. Once you get to the breeding shed, Suzie had mentioned the mare information sheet. Most of them want to have a mare information sheet that they want at the time of breeding. But the other thing that you can do when you arrive at the breeding shed is to give them any additional information that you can on the mare. Hopefully you've been able to tease her. You can tell them what her temperament is, how she's breaking down, if she stands well. If you have a teaser, you may be able to jump your mare at your farm. And all of this information helps the people in the breeding the breeding shed. What you can kind of expect in the breeding shed if you've never been there, most breeding sheds or breeding farms have what we call a teaser, or we had what I called a jump pony. And what we used that mare, we used a gelding, and we gave him testosterone, so he thinks he's a stallion. And we use him to jump the mare prior to breeding, so we know what that mare is going to do when we bring our stallion out to breed the mare. And I think it's really important to do that. Some people just tease the mare with the stallion, but by doing that, you really don't know how that mare is going to react when she's jumped. So I think a jump pony is very important. Mare preparation. This is something that every breeding shed has their own unique way of doing things and so forth. But the first thing you can do probably after the mare is jumped is that they're going to take the mare in some type of chute or restraining place and they'll wrap her tail, wash her vulva and perineum, and then they'll check. If she has a calyx, which we've mentioned before, then they will have to open the calyx if necessary before they can breed. Another thing that that is important, and I've found through the years, is everybody expects mares' cervixes to be open when they're in heat, and that is not always true. On foal heat, for sure it's open, but I have had maiden mares come in, and mares that are older mares that have never been bred before, that their cervix is very tight. It's nearly impossible to put your finger through the cervix. And if their cervix is not open, semen is not going through the cervix, and they aren't going to get pregnant. So your veterinarian at your farm should be able to tell you by doing a speculum exam or just manually feeling the cervix whether it's open or dilated. And they should pass that on to you so you can tell the breeding shed. If the breeding shed, or when they get to the breeding shed, if that cervix is not open, most of the breeding shed or breeding farms have someone there that can manually go in, dilate the cervix, and which will allow semen to get through. So that's just something else that have your veterinarian tell you what's going on with her cervix. Then the last thing that prior to breeding that you're probably going to do is that they're going to bring the stallion out and wash his penis, clean him up. And by washing the stallion, it basically just cuts down on the amount of bacteria and debris that is put into the mare during the breeding process. Mare restraint and protection, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Like I said, every breeding farm has their way of doing things. Sometimes more restraint is tougher on the mares, less restraint, they'll stand better. It's something that you just have to determine with the particular mare you're breeding. And just to run through some of these, in most of the, if you've been in the breeding shed, most of them will use a lip chain or a twitch. A lot of people, which I did, you pick up or tie up the left front leg. Some use padded boots on their hind feet, which you can see. If you have a stallion that's really savage as mares, most stallions when they breed, if you've seen them, they will actually bite the top of the mare's neck. Some of them can be really bad about biting mares' necks, and they have a leather protection thing that they can strap on the top of the mare's neck that the stallion actually grabs on and doesn't have to bite the mare, which helps her. And then a breeding roll, I don't know whether you're all familiar with that. It's used well, in small mares that are being bred to stallions with very large penises, you always have the possibility of causing a laceration in your uterine wall because he is so long and if he is a rough breeder. So a breeding roll, which most of you know, is placed between the mare's rear end and just above the stallion's penis, so he can only enter the mare so far, which protects her. The other thing that's not listed up here, which I just added later, is some mares are real badasses in the breeding shed, and you just basically have to sedate them and knock them completely out and basically rape them to breed them, even though they're in heat. They are really bad. So the only alternative you have is just really sedate them heavily and breed them. So anyway. So after you've got the mare prepped and everything's done and you bring the stallion in, and here again, if you've heard talking about the stallions, every stallion is different. Suzie had mentioned earlier that some of them, when they first start out, are really dumb. I mean, they don't know what the hell they're doing, and so forth. But some stallions come in, they breed very fast. Some breed very slow. Some like to nuzzle the mare. Some have to mount the mare 2 or 3 times before they ejaculate. But all these things are what's normal for that stallion. And I know it's frustrating to sit there and you want to get it done and you want your mare out of the breeding shed, but just give that stallion his time, because that's his little routine and he's probably not going to change it, and there's very little you can do to speed that up. Another thing is positioning the mares in the breeding shed. I know it's really tough sometimes to breed a very large mare to a small stallion and get a good cover. So there are some things. A lot of breeding sheds will actually dig a hole in the floor and bag the mare and put her hind legs in the breeding in the hole, and then he's able to mount and breed off of the normal level of the ground, and he can cover a little better. And also some stallions use a platform that they walk up on, and the mare's 4 or 5 inches below her, and you can get a good cover that way. After the stallion has bred the mare, I know I routinely did this, and most breeding sheds can. You should get and you have to have another person standing there with you after you breed. But when the stallion dismounts, you can get a sample of semen right at the end of the vulva and the end of his penis, and it's 2 things that you can do with this that we routinely is that you can check to be sure you have live motile sperm there, and that ensures that you have that he has ejaculated and that you have a good cover on the mare. The other thing that you can do with the remainder of the ejaculate is that you can, we are Thoroughbred, the Jockey Club allows you to take that semen and seminate it back into the mare. And usually you mix it with an extender and put it back into the mare. And that just increases your possibility of getting more semen into the uterus and you even conceiving more. So the other thing that I mentioned, the tight cervix, is if you have a mare that does have a tight cervix and you have a sample of semen and you haven't gotten enough semen through the cervix, if you put this in there, you got a good chance of her getting in foal. So this is this. The other reason to do it too is once in a while you'll have a stallion that you just get a poor cover from. I've had stallions that were breeding and for some reason they get off balance to come back out and they ejaculate outside of the mare. So if you can get the ejaculate, even if he hasn't covered her, you can put it in the mare and inseminate her. Okay, Jeff. Okay, just going on down, after you finish breeding, there are a couple things that you can do. If she has had her caslets removed, I like to put them back in as soon as possible. When I was in the breeding shed, what I would do is if I had to open a mare up and for somebody, I would just put it back in right then for them, and then they wouldn't have to do it when they got home. But if the farm doesn't have a veterinarian or somebody there to do it, when she gets back home, it probably should be put in as soon as possible just to ensure her not getting infected and so forth. The other thing that you can do when you get back is use what we call a myometrial stimulant, or which basically causes the uterus to contract. When you breed horses, you get a lot of bacteria, you got a lot of debris from just a natural breeding process. By using oxytocin, you can eliminate a lot of this and eliminate the possibility of the mare possibly getting infected. The other thing that you can here again, if you didn't give HCG or desrealin at the farm prior to breeding, then you should give it here. And the final thing that on this that's not listed here is that if you have a problem mare, not only using oxytocin, but you can also do, when you get back home, have your veterinarian do a uterine lavage to help clean out the bacteria, the debris and so forth that's put into the mare's uterus when she's bred. So that kind of ties that up. Any questions?
What percentage of first covers with all the protections and procedures that you've outlined are successful in your experience?
You know what? Probably on first cover, and I don't know the exact percentage, and that depends upon the farm you're breeding at. The stallion, maybe a veterinarian, whether the mare's getting sent there. A lot goes into whether, you know, if that mare gets covered or gets in foal the first time. But you ought to do all of the things you can, the uterine cultures, the HCG, or whatever you need to do to, you know, to do that. I know like I said, I like to breed on foal heat. And if you use the criteria for breeding on foal heat, I culture everything I can at day 7. I don't breed anything before day 9, okay? So I use oxytocin for the first 7 days to clean the mare out. I culture the mare on day 7. If she's clean and has not ovulated anything and ready to be bred by day 9 or further out, I will breed her. And by doing that on foal heat, I run about a 65% conception on foal heat, which is, if you use those criteria, which is a pretty good thing. If you can catch a mare on foal heat, you're through with her. And it's a heat cycle that's very predictable. You don't have to worry about, you know, a lot of things with it. Okay.
Dr. O'Kane, what do you think are the major factors for the, or what's changed with these huge books, these stallions? I mean, staying ethical about the answer, but what's contributed to where these stallions can breed 170, 180 mares a year?
Artificial insemination. No, I'm kidding. No, I didn't mean that. No, I didn't say that. No, no. You know what? They are probably handled a lot better than they used to be, okay? And it's not to say that horses in the past couldn't have bred that many, but the way our industry evolved, at one time a full book was 40 mares. I think Bull Rule at one time, his full book was 32. So it's something that if the stallion is managed right, they can breed that number of mares. The other thing that a lot of these farms don't do, they aren't going to give you a multiple cover on a mare. You better have the mare ready to breed when she gets to the breeding shed, because they aren't going to, you know, reschedule you and so forth. So, and I think another thing that probably increases the number of that they can breed is that probably, you know, maybe the veterinary services are better. If they send the mares that are, you know, easier to get in foal, they're sure they have a negative uterine culture, and just the aftercare on the mares may help the numbers. And they take less covers to breed that mare.
Hi, Dr. O'Kane, Barbara Murphy.
Hey.
How long post-covering can you give oxytocin?
How what?
At what time post-covering is it best to give oxytocin? How long does it actually take sperm to reach the fallopian tubes?
Yeah, like you can 4 hours, like after that. You know, I usually go a little bit more than that, but they say you can give as close as 4 hours.
That's long enough for all the sperm to...
Yes, it's going up the, oviduct, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Doc, when a mare, we'll check mares in the afternoon, and then because we ship, a lot of times we'll check the next morning if we feel we may have missed her and she's too close. But if we check a mare in the morning and that follicle is melting, let's say, what do you feel is a time frame where we're still going to get a viable egg? Because we have to ship.
Run that by me again.
Okay. So if we check a mare, let's say in the afternoon one day, because we're shipping 3 hours plus usually, we'll check them first thing in the morning if we can get the vet there. Let's say that follicle's in the process of melting, the mare is ovulating.
Okay.
What time frame do you think that egg stays viable?
I'll give you a story. When I first came to New York, I I was palping about 500 mares. I had two large farms that I did, and I would start at like 4:30 in the morning, and I think by like 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I had 4 mares that had ovulated and all going to the same stallion. Okay, so we bred one maybe at 7, one at 10, one at 2, one at 4. All 4 of them got in foal. So I don't think it depends upon the mare, the egg, but they can get in foal a really long time past ovulation. You don't want to do that. But I don't have a problem breeding mares that have ovulated, and you know it's been fairly soon.
So would you say 7, 8, 9 hours?
That's probably pushing it in most cases. But if they, like when I check a mare in the morning and I feel like let's say it's 7, 8 o'clock, and I feel like they've ovulated like early that morning, I'll breed them. I'll try to breed them. Yeah, but no. But I mean, and like I said, I mean this was 12 hours post ovulation on some of these mares. That's an exception. So, I mean, and it depends upon your situation. If you're in a situation where maybe this is your last chance to breed that mare that year, breed her, take a shot with it.
But otherwise, if she's in the process of ovulating, we can get her right in the trailer and get it to the stallion within 3 hours, 4 hours, we're probably still good.
Breed her, yeah.
That's kind of been our rule then, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I just want to go back to the question about these huge books for stallions. And I'm a veterinarian, but I'm speaking as a breeder here, and I want to refer to what Doc said, which is that it really depends on the management. These horses are getting bred 4 times a day. It really needs to be spread out in the farm. And I myself try to avoid really big books because it depends on the fertility of the sire, too. I've had the experience of sending a mare to Kentucky, not having her get in foal, there's nothing wrong, and I found out, you know, the management there, even though it's Kentucky, it wasn't great. So I think you always got to look at the fertility of the sire, how that's being managed, and with a little, this was a well-known farm, and with a little pushing and shoving and investigation, we got that mare the next time covered the first breeding of the day, and she got in foal, but that stallion was being overbred. So it's something that you got to always be, you know, looking at and concerned. And if your mare's not getting in foal and your vet telling you nothing wrong, you know, do a little investigation because everything might not be copacetic, especially when they get up around, you know, 175, things like that.
Yeah, these stallions, they can breed 3-4 times a day for a day or so, but after that, their semen volume drops considerably, so they have to be given a little bit of a break. So, and like she said, it's just management of the stallion probably is the most important thing, why they can breed more than they used to.
Let's go with the mic really
I just have a question about the Deserillin, and this is kind of a follow-up to her question about shipping mares. I've always been of the mind that I don't give them Deserillin or HCG until after they come home, because if I'm shipping this mare 3 hours away, what if we get a flat tire, there's a snowstorm, da-da-da, and she's going to ovulate on the truck before she gets there? And
She's not.
So I'm just being paranoid.
All medications take time to work. Okay, so I mean, it's just like you taking a medication. It takes time for it to get into your system. And with giving HCG or Deserillin, it's not going to work immediately to cause that mare to ovulate. So you've got time to play with it.
I'll throw my 2 cents worth in, which we were going to add to later. But in a perfect world, I give it to all my mares the day before they breed. I think it takes at least 36 hours for it to work. He just said, I rarely check mares the same day they go. We book them the day before, we give them the shot, and most of those mares have ovulated by the day after we breed them. And I think it closes the window. And I think that is what's allowed these horses to have bigger books, too. The window of breeding has been tightened.
Yeah, well, you were talking about more mares being bred, like Scott just said. At one time, they weren't using HCG, Deserillin like they do now to cause these mares to ovulate like they did. So it helps a lot.
Yes, I feel like that little girl that you were talking about with my question. Why do you say in your little thing that you tie up the left leg and not the right? Because
you can't.
which is
Because
the difference?
you know what? When most people work with horses, they are working off the left side. Okay,
Yeah,
the
that's
horse
what
is used
my
to
daughter said
them
that
working off the left side. So the stallion manager, everybody's on the left side of the horse. The stallion manager that's handling the stallion, he brings the stallion in on the left side. So it's actually a protection for the people as well as the mare.
Okay.
But now, and that's not to say you can't pick up the right front. I've had mares that come to the breeding shed that have a problem with their left front. We'll pick up their right front.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
You should